problematic.
How do you think we had hundreds of thousands of concentration camp guards and people in the SS? The Germans are just like us.
Yeah.
They don't create, 10-15% of their population as psychopaths. They're just like us.
Yeah.
But when you put weak people in those situations, averagely weak people, they will do as they're told. They will commit atrocities. They've done studies on this.
Yeah.
There was a good study in America in the 60s. They can't ever replicate this study now because they would never get permission because of the abuse. But they got away with it in the 60s. They got some college students, split them into two groups, blue eyes and brown eyes. And they locked up the brown-eyed students and told the blue-eyed students they're guards. And they witnessed what they did over several days. After several days, the blue-eyed people were abusing the brown-eyed people.
Really?
And all students. Only took a couple of days.
Yeah. There's that electricity thing as well. I've heard about that. Where it's if you give them electric shock, because I can't remember what it is. But
yeah, well, I've actually wrote about that.
Yeah.
So that was to see how far somebody would go inflicting pain. So they got volunteers.
Yeah.
And they had a professor and two volunteers. One of the volunteers was an actor, but they thought he was a volunteer, the other volunteer. And they sat in two separate rooms, and the actor was strapped up to a fake electric shock machine, and the student was in the other room, and they could communicate over microphone, and he had the electric shock machine. And the dial went up from mild, strong, very strong, to do not use, fatal. Something like 70% of the students, when instructed, used the fatal setting. And the actor in the other room knew when it was pressed, because the light would come on, got no shock, and then would scream.
Yeah.
And when they used the fatal one, something like 70% of students...
But what were they saying to the student to make them do that?
This is what you're being paid for. Don't worry what happens to him. I'll take responsibility of what happens. I need you to press that buzzer one more time on fatal. And they had several phrases to use if they wouldn't do it.
Right.
Some would press it straight away. Some would take several encouragement from the professor before they would press it. But something like 70% of students pressed the fatal button. The button said fatal. And they still pressed it.
They pressed it. I mean, there's other things to talk about here, but all this conversation, which is kind of reinforcing what I kind of am starting to understand, is actually quite depressing, because what you're really saying is it doesn't really matter whether it's Labour or Tory or BLM or what. The majority of people will start to conform in certain situations and go along with whoever's in charge, is basically what you're saying. But isn't that quite depressing?
It's not. That's human nature. What stops us doing that are our institutions. So when people are always talking about our institutions, such as the police, such as the judiciary, such as the BBC, and people are going, oh, who cares about the BBC? Well, on its own, yeah, who cares? But we have all these institutions that wrap around our democracy to make sure anyone in power cannot go too far to the left or to the right or up or down. And also those institutions, and why those institutions are also separated from the government, is to make sure they're independent. That is what keeps us from committing atrocities. It's our institutions, our culture. And we've been chipping away at those things for decades now. That's why...
Oh, all right. So you're actually not saying the BBC's fulfilling that function anymore?
No, they're not.
Right. Okay.
They're not. The BBC does not bring us together anymore now.
Yeah.
The BBC is actually actively separating us along identity politics.
Yeah.
So when it comes to me hitting that button on fatal for black people or for gay people, I'm probably more inclined to do that now, because I don't see them now as just like me and British. I see them now as black. I see them now as gay. BBC's been doing this for decades.
Yeah, but they're not doing black and gay anymore on their imaginary knob, are they?
No. What I mean is a person sat in your room connected to the machine.
Yeah.
Could be black or gay. I'm still going. I'm more likely now to press fatal, because I do not see myself in that person.
Yeah.
Where if that person was just called British,
yeah,
well, he's just like me, isn't it? So I'd be less likely to want to persecute that person.
But I think what you're actually saying is quite interesting. I think it would be useful to track this imaginary knob over the decades, if that makes sense, or the dial over the decades, because probably 40 years ago that dial did have on it black, gay, I'm just trying to think of something exactly, it's Irish or whatever it might be. I would say that the pointers on that dial now will say things like conservative. It'll say things like transphobic. It would say things like anti-COVID so the constituents of that have changed now, and it's not about racial types or persons. It's about belief systems, isn't it? If you have a belief system, these belief systems are not acceptable to us as the institution. We're telling you now, as the BBC does, you can't have a Doctor Who show without it, featuring a bloke dressed up as a 14-year-old girl, basically. This is what's happening with the institutions. They're promoting things that to me seem alien, and because my views tend to be not affiliated or aligned with them, I find myself a victim of that dial now.
It's worse than that, because it's not just about people who are anti-trans or that. We're dividing the whole society up. So no one in any group now trusts anybody else outside that other group. Yeah. We have people who call themselves trans and they're homophobic. We have lesbians who hate gays.
Yeah.
And so it's not like there's any particular group we won't inflict pain upon, because it all depends who the person is inflicting. But the BBC was designed to bring us all together as a nation under God, under our king, late queen, but now king. Doesn't do that anymore now. So we're fractured as a society. Just like we talked about the Jewish problem, a fractured society will persecute other tribes in that society because you're not the same as me.
Yeah.
The reason why we created nation states was to bring everybody in that land under one umbrella, so we all felt the same. We may have had different colour skin, different religions, different beliefs, different political affiliations, but we all came together under something that we all belong to, and that's all been chopped up now. Hence why we're more at risk of this sectarian violence we're seeing now.
So when we started this particular bit, you said it'll never get there because we've got institutions, but at the same time you've now demolished those institutions and said they're not really performing the function. So
that's the danger.
So why?
That's the danger.
Right. Okay.
So those institutions are not fully demolished yet.
Right.
But they're not doing what they should be doing, and they've been damaged over 20, 30 years. If we don't fix those institutions, we're heading down that road. We're just not there yet. Well, we're on the foothills of it. Look what's happening to the Jews in our country.
Yeah. No, this is why I wanted to we've discussed the Jews a lot in this, but the reason I'm discussing it is because I'm seeing things happening now that I would never have imagined all the way through my life in this country.
If you like that video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell and comment. And if you like what I'm saying about running for Mayor of Greater Manchester, then stick around. Tell your family, tell your friends. The only way I'm going to have a chance of winning is a grassroots movement. So be part of that movement and hit that bell. Thanks.